Welcome back to the show, everybody. My name is Josh Forti, and today we have a very special guest. If you don't know him, you should know him. And if you do know him, you know that you know him. And I'm very excited to talk to him today about a lot of things, but particularly around if you want to learn about relationships, just in general, high profile relationships, how to build a business, a multi-seven, maybe 8. I don't know where he's at now. A big business based solely on relationships, then you're in for a treat. Welcome to the show, the billion click bearded legend. I came up with a nickname for you just for the show. Welcome, Damon Burton. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Josh. I'm excited to talk for many reasons, and I feel like I have a little leverage on this one because you're a father now. Like, welcome to my territory.
I do. I am. I am a father now. Crazy. Actually, this is the first episode I'm doing, or the first interview I'm doing post fatherhood.
Perfect.
Crazy.
This is perfect.
This is
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, the topics you talked about before the bearded billionaire click comment, I think is great because relationships is how you and I met, and then
Yeah.
relationships is how you and I have stayed in touch.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's what's crazy is, dude, for the longest time, I just couldn't figure you out. It was so wild. Like we had our podcast because we got introduced via
Imi.
podcast actually, but via Emmy, right?
Uh,
And then we got on, and then you just like started sending me gifts, and I was like, why?
Was it the second or third one? I don't even know how many I sent you, but like, was it the first one? You're like, what's up with
No, the
this? Or
first
you
one
let
it
it
was
sit?
like okay, that happens, but then it was like the second one, and it was like pretty close together, right? And there was no reason for it. It wasn't like a
Uh-huh.
year later, and it was just out of the blue. It was like a month or two, and then like a third one came, and um I think where it really clicked, where I was like, okay, he's just a cool dude, I guess, was when you sent Leah, my wife, that pinata for her birthday. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And we took it out, and we wanted to. I don't know. I don't remember if we sent you the
You,
video or
you
not,
you
but
did. You got on your Jeep.
I hung it over the Jeep, and she had like the machete, right? And
Uh-huh.
she was like hitting it out with the machete. And she's like, why did he send this? I'm like, I don't know. He just keeps sending gifts. I don't get him. He's cool. Like, deal with it. And I'm like, okay. And I think like part of the reason I'm like excited for the podcast, and we briefly talked about this before, I, I had Think Different Theory, and that was going really well. And the idea behind that was to ask life's biggest questions. And then obviously the whole Apple thing happened, and we had to rebrand, and then we kind of started again or whatever. And I don't think I lost track of the purpose of my original intention with the podcast. I just second guessed it and was like, was that just luck, or was that just I was just trying to be a good marketer type deal or whatever? But it's not. And the more I, especially with pregnancy, my wife being pregnant now, actually being a dad, asking life's biggest questions, like truly trying to understand life and figure out people, figure out, how it all works, and asking really good questions. One of the
Mhm.
things that's become incredibly, incredibly important to me through this is relationships. And as much as I hated relationships early on in my career, I'm like, ew, relationships are messy and people are yucky and ugh, right? Because,
That's
past
still true.
experiences. Yeah, but we all are, right? So, but
Mhm.
like I tried to avoid it. Now, like most of my money and most of my success in whatever capacity that looks like has been through relationships. And I've started asking once again, just with the podcast, to ask life's biggest questions, to just distill down success so that idiots like me can have some success. Relationships have been at a core part of that. And I think that
Mhm.
you do relationships, I don't even know, like definitely differently than most anyone else I've met. And I've been fascinated by that. And that's kind of the topic. I feel like I mean, we'll just chat, but like I feel like that's where it's gonna be. But
Mhm.
like actually, my question is, in a nutshell, what's your approach to relationships? But in answering that, give me a 30-second context for those of you people that have no idea who you are. Like, give me your credentials. Like, you built a business, how much revenue, blah, blah, blah. You've done all this stuff. What do you do? But then answer that question.
Sure. Yeah. So Damon Burton founded a search engine optimization company in 2007, run a team of 50 or 60, built that into mid 7 figures in annual recurring revenue without spending a dollar on ads. Big part of those relationships, which we'll talk about. So that's kind of the crash course background. Work with a lot of high profile people, NBA teams. Russell Brunson wrote a book about it. There's the credentials. Okay.
There,
So
perfect. You're
relationships.
legit.
the way that I look at relationships is kind of in two phases. Like there's a part of it now that's intentional, but it's intentional without expectation. So it's like
Yeah.
I do it strategically, but not because not manipulatively. But where it started was largely just, and still is a big part of it, is I just enjoy relationships. And like the further you get in success, generally the smaller your circle gets in some way. Like it gets bigger, but it gets smaller. And so
Yeah.
you have a bigger reach and a bigger audience, but your inner circle, for lack of pun, gets smaller. And so you're more protective of your time and your mental bandwidth. And so when there's an opportunity for somebody to engage, for like me to engage with somebody that I'm like, oh, they would complement that for your mental sanity, and the more success you find, the harder it is to find people that can relate to the things that come with it.
Right.
And so then it's like, oh, it must be nice, first world problems and this and that, which is totally true, but it doesn't lessen the effect of how much it weighs on you.
Right.
And so when there's an opportunity to network with somebody, then that's where that's where a lot of it starts with. But then the way I get there is the wild card. And so I don't have like you and I, right? When we first met, it's like it was pretty simple in concept, where it's like I want to have some sort of association with Josh. I didn't know what it meant beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause you right there. Why? And here's the context behind that question.
Mhm.
One of my best friends, who you know, but we need to get you knowing more of, is Brad Gibb, right? And I had him over at my house. We were chatting, and I asked Brad, like, what are my strengths and weaknesses, getting feedback.
Mhm.
And he said, Josh, one of your biggest strengths is that you are delusionally self-confident, almost to the point where it is unearned, right? And like, to me, that is a fantastic compliment, because I'm just like,
Mhm.
yes, that is me, right? And so I say this with understanding that, like, I'm just me for a second. I
Uh-huh.
have incredible value in myself. And so I believe that I am worthy of I believe I make people's lives better because I choose to try to do that, right?
Uh-huh.
But the time that we met years ago, I don't
Uh-huh.
feel like I was particularly, I certainly
I can
wasn't as
answer
valuable as
it.
I am now, right? I didn't have as
I
much
can
leverage or pull, maturity. Why did you want to be friends with me?
Yeah, I can answer that. And then I'll actually come back to what you're getting at too.
Yeah.
So at the time, I wanted to uh, get in my reps with podcasts, right? But I didn't
Mm,
want to just do any podcast. And so of the little I knew of you at the time, it had nothing to do with wanting to leverage any influence now or
right.
that you
Right.
had then. Like I knew very little about you. And so it was, he's high energy, he's positive, um, has a podcast. It's about things that are in the space that I can talk about, or at least want to be recognized within. Let's connect. And it was pretty simplistically that.
Got it.
But you bring up a great point about like, so let's replay it. Let's say we didn't know each other, and I engaged you, and now I do know your network. It still wouldn't have been different, because even if there's somebody like Russell, right? Russell has a lot that people would want to leverage. But even with somebody like that, I don't want those things. It's
Yep.
that those are the type of people that understand our world. And
Yep.
so I want more people in those worlds. And so the wild card part of it is, if we continue to use Russell as an example, is so I've been in his inner circle 3 years now. You played a part in that
Oh
introduction.
yeah, we'll talk about that. That's fine.
and and now Russell's one of my newest clients. My goal in establishing a relationship with Russell was not to get anything. I want absolutely nothing from him. I also acknowledge that by having networks with people, opportunities come up.
Yeah.
And so the fact that like I never had any intentional pursuit of Russell. By proxy, there was opportunities that would come up. And so I don't I never pursue anything directly. I like, and part of what there's a couple beautiful things that happen from that. One is that when you go and you serve somebody and you give without expecting in return, then you always get back that wild card, something that you didn't expect that is generally greater than what
Mm,
you could have got had you been intentional and manipulative to pursue something directly. So I've kind of been lucky in some ways where it's like just been my nature where it's selfishly rewarding to serve other people. And so
for
now I'm
sure.
intentional about serving other people. And then from that, nice things happen.
Yeah.
But I don't go for the nice things. It just
Yeah.
comes with the territory of helping other people.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think you're very like, I know that you're genuine in what you're saying. You know, I mean, I know you, I have a relationship with you, and I feel that from you. And like, I think you and I are similar in a lot of ways that we both built our businesses based primarily on relationships, right? I mean, I think yours is probably almost exclusively, right? And mine is close to that. And I have a program that where, I teach people podcasting, how to make lots of money with podcasts. But they're like, well, how do you decide, what you're going to ask the person, or how do you pick, who's your ideal client to have on your podcast or whatever? And I'm like, I don't.
mhm,
I just identify the people that I want to talk to, and then I build a relationship with them. And then if it happens to come up that they have a problem that I can solve, then I'm like, oh my gosh, let me help you with that. And then I do
mhm,
it, and they're like, let me hire you, right? And they're like, well, how do you build a business that way? I'm like, I don't know. They're like, how much is the client worth to you? I'm like, I don't know. Like some of them are worth nothing, and some of them are worth $300,000, right? And there's because that's not the intention.
mhm,
And I feel like that is so hard for people to comprehend. It's certainly hard for me to comprehend before I started doing it, right? It's so hard for
mhm.
people to comprehend that like you just genuinely want a relationship with other people with nothing in return.
The answer is delayed gratification. People have a hard time wrapping their head around delayed gratification. I think in general, people have a hard time with that, but it's more complicated these days because of social media and highlight reels and
Yeah.
paid ads and instant gratification. And so the attention span of people willing to invest in a long-term thing with an unknown payoff is a lot harder to wrap their head around than, well, I could do this thing over here and put $1 in and get $2 out. But when you look at when you approach things the way that we're talking about, then it becomes not only more sustainable because it's built on something more solid and more than just a transaction, but then you also have the potential for, instead of $1 in, $1 out, to have hockey sticks,
Yeah.
$1 in, $5,000 out. And then when, as we briefly talked about, your inner circle becomes tighter and smaller, when you get into these inside relationships, because everybody's on a similar level of understanding how valuable those relationships are in your mental bandwidth, they're very protective of the people that are in that group. And so when you get into a very protected space that now people will put their name behind your name. And so then you get access and privileges that you wouldn't have otherwise. So
Yeah.
there's countless, like I could have never paid for ads to get Russell as a client.
Right. Okay. So okay. So that's a great question or segue into the question. And we're not done with this conversation. So we can tear into this. But like, I was like told like, okay, relationships aren't tangible. You can't really measure them. That's not how a real business is run. Right. Like I remember hearing that early on, right? It's like you need ads because you need KPIs, you need to track things and yada, yada, yada.
Mm,
Right. And then you have people like you that's like, well, I built a multi 7-figure business with off of relationships. And I go, okay, I try to take, when it comes to like principles of success, and particularly when I'm in the mindset space of the podcast is my place to think and to analyze and to ask questions, right? When I look at the world today and you scale to the highest level of things, like the ultimate, like who are the top dog power players, right? And like in an industry, you might think Russell Brunson, but like in the world, you're talking like the Elon Musks of the world, right? Or the
mhm.
Larry, what's the Google guy's name?
Page.
Perry Page, thank you, right?
Mhm,
Like you're not running ads to them,
mhm,
right? Like the whole world, when you actually study it, it seems to me as though like it's all built on relationships. When
mhm,
one of my favorite pictures is like when Elon, did you see the leaked text between Elon and Larry when he was raising money for Twitter?
mhm,
Oh, dude, he texted Elon or he texted Larry and he was like, "Hey, I'm raising money for, to buy Twitter or whatever. Um, are you in? I'm not going to hold you anything, but if you are, like, what do you think?"
mhm.
And Larry goes, yeah, I would do 1 billion, or whatever you think. And Elon
Yeah,
goes, I would recommend 2 billion because like I think this has huge potential upside. It's
yeah.
like, over a 4 conversation
Yeah.
text, a multi-billion-dollar deal just went down. It's like
Yeah.
run an ad to that,
You
right?
can't. You
So
can't.
how does one, I guess like there's the yin and yang of life, right? There, like, it's like, do you sell with emotion or logic? It's like, well, yes, right? Like you just
Yeah.
do. And so it's like in relationships or in building success in a network, have you found, like, you're very good, and you've said that the key to it is having no expectation of return. That's how I got Russell. That's how you built your relationships, right? Like you can't go in with an ulterior motive, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, however, feel like, or in your process of building all of these relationships with people, which you've done a phenomenal job with, that there are not KPIs, but that there are things that you can do or look at to like measure the progress of the relationship, or like the, not the value of it, but like the substance behind it or not?
Uh, I, me personally, no. Conceptually, yes, but I've never done it, and I don't think that I ever will, because then it taints your intention of the relationship. As soon as
Okay.
you start exploring, can I leverage? You actually said something in a text you sent me. I can't remember what we were talking about, but you had a phrase that, for whatever reason, stuck in my head, and it was. I don't even remember what it was, but it was somebody we had a mutual contact with, and you said, I could ask so and so, but I don't want to use relationship capital. Right. And so, like, as soon as you start measuring these, because you get in these relationships we talked about without expecting in return, as soon as you start quantifying if it's measurable, then you start adding in expectations of something in return. So, yes, you could, but I think you open up the door to taint why the relationship was successful to begin with.
Yes, but not, okay, like intention matters. Yes.
Yeah.
Hugely, right? So, like, if I wanted to better understand something, like, I would want to understand what makes up its parts, right? So, like, what I'm asking is not how do I measure what I can, what it's worth to me. But like, for example, I went and I studied the core components of a powerful relationship, right? Like what actually makes up whether or not you and I have a relationship or not. Not like how, like not what
Not what
it's,
you can get from
yeah,
it.
not just like what are the components of it. And what I found was basically 3 things, right? Number one is that the foundation of any relationship is somewhere along the line there's a shared value or values, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if we have nothing in common at all, we have no shared values at all, it's like then we're not gonna have a relationship. But if like the only thing we have in common is we both liked football, well, we could have that level of it. And if we got
Mm-hmm.
further, we both like family, right? Like so like somewhere along the line, there's values, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next part of that would be like in order for a relationship to continue, like get stronger, deepen, there must be mutual benefit to both parties. Like my life must get better by being around you. Your life must get better by being around me. Because if my life gets worse, I'm not going to want to be around you, and vice versa. Now, that's not to say like, oh, what can I get out of you? But rather, what can I give to make their life better? Right. So there has to be mutual benefit. And then third is there has to be some level of consistency over time. Right. Like you can't just go and be like, well, now I hate you, or now I no longer value the things that you value. And me be like, okay, cool, we're still friends. You have
Yeah.
to still be you, right, over time. And so when
Yes.
I look at those, I go, okay, if those are like the 3 elements of a, not like what I'm measuring per se, but just like I look like the components of it, right?
Okay.
Then I feel like I could intentionally make the relationship stronger with no ulterior motives,
Got
right?
it.
Like by focusing on those 3 things. Yes or no?
I would agree with that. Yes.
Okay.
So now I understand the clarification. So
Yeah.
it's analyzing it not for benefit, but for optimization.
Right. Okay. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Now coming full circle, do I do that? Um, I've never. I've never directly thought of it that way, but I'd probably say yes. And that probably actually ties back to um because where I'm trying to separate in my head is um you can contribute to this concept of intentionality for optimization, but my head wants to default, does it have to be on a grand scale? And I'm hitting dead ends going, no, that doesn't sound right. So then on the opposite side of that, I'm thinking, well, it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. I mean, on a small scale. And where that brings me back to is like the gifts, right? And
Right.
so, and I think about the examples you gave of when our relationship first started. And yes, that was the intent, because it's like, okay, how can I contribute to Josh's life in a way that's not cheesy, right?
Right.
And so I like the idea of swag and stuff like that. I've never been a big fan of.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm not going to send Josh a thing of his own company. I'm certainly not going to send him a thing of my company. So
Except
what
for condoms with your face on it. Other than that, because that definitely happened.
that that I don't do we elaborate on that now, or do we just like
Nope.
we
No
just leave
context.
it?
Just
Okay, all right,
that.
we'll leave it. All
Just
right.
that.
I did, other than the acknowledgement that I, in fact, did give him condoms with my face on it. So, all right, we'll leave it at that. So, if I think about, okay, of the little I know of Josh, what can I send? Like, in the beginning, I didn't know enough about you to send you something hyper personal.
Right.
So, therefore, my goal on the opposite side is to not send you something hyper generic. And so,
Mm,
what can I provide without knowing
okay.
with confidence
That's good.
that is personal? And so, the pinata is a great example, because a pinata is not generic,
Right.
and it is unique enough that it's memorable. And in the context of how it was sent, it provides value in the form of entertainment and some sort of acknowledgement where Damon spent time on me.
Right.
He spent intentional time on me. So, yeah, I suppose I do, and it probably in its infancy is in the form of those gifts.
So how then do you like, dude, with the amount of gifts that I get from you, or just like that I know other people get from you, like, how do you even manage? Like, it's got to be a full-time job, right? Because I know I'm not the only one you're sending gifts to, right? Like,
It's
how do you manage?
That's funny you bring this up, because it's getting there. Yeah, like I'm starting. Okay, so let's start with the basics, right? So the concept of how do you send gifts that are personable without knowing enough personal things? That's the first thing, is like, okay, so I have a handful of things that I really enjoy sending. So like one I just sent you after your child was born,
Yeah.
and it's this custom it's a food gift, but it's not, it is the food, but it's also the unboxing
Right.
experience,
Yep.
right?
For sure.
And so it's an emotional experience, but it's very intentional, because you just had a child. I know what it's like. Food sucks. Time is short. You don't want fast food all the time. So here's something that you can make that's healthy, that tastes good, that satisfies the need, that all the pros of fast food without any of the cons,
Right.
and it's through an experience. And so it's like, how can I come up with, or how can I identify gift giving options that are unique but are intentional? And so that's kind of been the first evolution, was when I realized years ago, this is just something I enjoy. So then how do I do it repetitively? And
Yeah.
I had to find those common denominators. And so the common denominators were things that are useful and not generic. And then so I started mentally bookmarking things for different occasions.
Interesting.
And so then when those occasions came up with new relationships, then I had to go too. Like I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and I knew that I could consistently establish some sort of relationship while also giving value to that person's life. So that's the first part of the answer. Now, you say in full-time job and things like that, I laugh because I'm running out of mental bandwidth of remembering who I've sent what for which occasions.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually trying to decide, like, do I commit to this enough that I create some sort of matrix or database over I've sent what for what occasion? So it's a valid question.
But I feel like I mean, I hate when people are like, just create a software for it. Cause I'm like, there's a billion softwares. You don't need another software. But like, I
Mhm.
feel like there's a void here in the sense of Like a traditional CRM isn't going to cut it, right?
Mhm.
But like for someone like me who does appreciate, I mean, I like giving gifts as well, right? That's definitely high on my love language as far as like what I like to do for other people. It is a full-time job, right? Or, you know, kind of think through these things. But like also, I feel like your actions, generally speaking, reflect who you are as a person most of the time, right? So like if I send gifts, it's typically when the intentions are correct, it's because that's the type of person that I am. That's that person that you are.
Mhm.
So if I were to be the bet, like if Tom Brady was really good at football and he like wanted to become the best at football, he would then build systems with intentionality that allowed him to be better at football,
Mhm.
right? And you wouldn't be like, oh, well, he's just doing that, you know, just because he wants to be better than everybody else in football. It's like, well, yeah, but like that's not a bad thing, right?
Mhm.
And so like I feel the same thing with the relationship thing where it's like if you build systems around that and commit to that, that allows you to be better at it than anyone else. Yes.
True. Yeah.
And I feel like that problem, I don't feel like there's a good solution, at least not that I know of for it.
Well, it also depends on the context of the relationship because I can answer this slightly better in the scope of client relationships
Okay.
because we have built processes around that.
Okay.
So if we can take the same concept of acknowledging a person, so in this case, a client, um, as an individual, and that's the key, especially in this, because now we're shifting gears like B2B, right? And
Yeah.
so when you acknowledge a client, from my perspective, it's like I'm sending an acknowledgement not to continue to buy the relationship and hope they continue to pay the invoices,
Right.
but for the same concept to establish a relationship, to acknowledge that we provide value and we look at you more than just an invoice. And so same concepts apply. How much do you know about your clients? How can you send something that's personable if you don't know enough about them as an individual? And so what we've done is we've built out touch points and processes and put them into our documentation, our SOPs. And so I'll walk you through like the ascension of those touch points. And so in the beginning, when you bring on a client, you know,
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, because I do want to go there. Just real quick, frame context of this of what percentage of the relationships that you have, would you say, are people that are non client or potential client down the road? Not that you have the intention to turn them into a
okay,
client, like
I get what you're
non-business
saying.
versus business.
So despite us talking about relationships and the effectiveness of it in my world, the minority of them, I wouldn't say a small percentage, but if it's like more or less than 50%,
Yeah.
less than 50% of them have come from uh, this historical process, right? And so the majority of them, yes, have come from relationships, but it's been like Josh sent me somebody and I don't know that person at all. So
Got
there's
it.
a warm introduction, but I don't know a lot about the person themselves. Does that answer it?
But I'm talking about business versus non-business relationships versus like outside of clients, outside of because like you and I have a personal relationship, yes, but our relationship started because of the business world, right?
Right.
So, and that developed into a personal relationship. What percentage of your relationships that you have like strong relationships with people are outside of the business world that where you connected with someone or got introduced to them and there's nothing because it can't be many, right? Like a
Oh,
majority have to be in
the
the business world because we're
opposite.
entrepreneurs.
So are you asking personal that became clients or clients that then became personal?
Neither. I'm asking purely separately. Forget about like the client process that we're about to talk about. I'm just
Mhm.
curious in general of the percentage of your relationships, how many came from the business world and how many came from outside of the business world where they
My
started?
my current network is largely entrepreneurs
Yeah.
and some
Okay.
sort of
And that's what
business
I assumed.
association. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So
With
now
with few
good.
with few exceptions of people that I've known since like teenage years.
Right. Right. And I'm in that same boat. So now in the concept of business world, there are essentially two groups, if you will, more or less, of people, which are just relationships in the business world or whatever. You, me, you, well, Russell's a client now, but just generic business world and then client specific, right? And you have a process built into SOPs for the client specific.
Correct.
Okay. Go.
So on the client specific ones, that's what I want to give the example to of like touch points. And so
Yep.
some of this, I can speak with more clarity on how to create a model, because ultimately that's kind of what you're saying is there's a missing opportunity here, and how do you create a process out of it? So I have that more in the client specific relationships than I do in the wild card of just personal relationships. So in client relationships, it's like usually you don't know them hyper personally in the beginning. That may evolve over time.
Yep.
So therefore you don't want to come in and give hyper personal gifts because it's weird. And so what you start with is general stuff. So like a really good example is when we onboard a client, one of the first things we do within week one is send them a welcome kit. But the welcome kit is not swag, and it's not all corporate crap that's boring. But there is educational material in there, so you can establish expectations of, like, in my scope of SEO, it's like, this is how this works and this is how long it's going to take. But in it, it's very personal. And so like, I'll give you one example is, a couple of years ago, I had somebody, a friend of mine, send me a Roman coin, and you might have seen this post, but he sent me a handwritten letter with a coin that's 2,000 years old, and the letter in summary said, "This coin represents freedom of time, because 2,000 years ago, a master would effectively ask a slave, 'What would you trade your life for?' And it was this coin." And so the note went on to say, continue to be unordinary and continue to not trade your time for a speck of silver, right? And so the story behind him giving me that, and the personability behind it, of him willing to spend the time to write me a letter and tell me a story and give me something unique, is impactful. And so that's a good example where you can take, and we started integrating that into our welcome kits.
Okay.
Because we can go, this coin represents the time you saved that you can spend on things that you value more than SEO. And so now you reinforced your expertise and why they hired you, while giving them some sort of personal engagement, because you hand wrote a card, and I don't know anybody else that's sending 2,000-year-old coins.
Right.
So you start with something where it's like, you can either reinforce your expertise, reinforce their purchasing decision, but we also don't want to be manipulative about this. And so we're not sending swag and we're not kissing their ass, but it's like, I'm going to hand write this because you matter to me.
Yeah.
So
and also, but I also think that comes back to right there too, which would be a shared value, which is time. And, the fact that they want to go do things that are more valuable to them outside of something that they're not an expert at, just as you want to as well.
I think the concept of time is so underutilized, and even I didn't acknowledge that until I started including this coin after my friend had sent it to me. Because when I verbalized it, when I'm like, you hiring us as an agency frees up your time to literally not spend the time doing this, but also metaphorically in your mental bandwidth.
Right.
And so now you have these experts, which frees up your time that you can go to. When I looked at it that way, how valuable time is. I know how valuable time. All of us know how valuable time it is. But I never had thought about positioning it as a value proposition. In concept, I had, but like quite literally said, we are saving you time. Thank you for trusting us with that opportunity.
So, okay, I want to continue. I have a question on that. Finish the
ascension.
The ascension of this, because this is good.
So we'll put in, so it's documented in our processes, like week one after onboarding, send them a welcome kit. And then after that, then we'll space it out, because the other thing is, and you touched on this, is the frequency of gifts, right? So in the beginning, you're like, why is this guy sending me so much stuff? This is kind of weird.
Yeah.
And so that's more likely to happen in a client engagement where it's like, are they just trying to buy me off?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you have to be gentle or sensitive to what you send when and in what order. So then what we do is a month later, we'll just send them a thank you card. We'll just handwrite them a thank you card that says, we appreciate the opportunity to work on, XYZ business. Okay. So it's not over. Like the first thing, the Roman coin was deep. Now it's just a touch point. on that one. So then we slowly space it out, and so then I think at month 3, we send them some sort of celebratory thing where it's like a win. We'll send them. We have a couple clients that send food gifts, and so that's another thing that we'll do is we'll try to reinvest in the people that invest in us. So we will pay for our clients' products to send other clients, because that also creates an opportunity for you to share a story. And
Yeah.
so we can then go. What I recently did is I redid our 3-month touch point so it still says, congratulations. What ours says is, happy 3-month SEO birthday or something like that.
Mm-mm.
And so now what we do is we modified it, and where it still says that, but then we go, one example might be Rockwell. So Rockwell Watches is a new client. And
Oh,
so
nice.
we bought some of their inventory. And so now at 3 months, I can go, hey, happy 3-month SEO birthday. We like to share with our clients the wins of our other clients. And so it kind of creates this concept of a community, the SEO
Yeah.
national community. But then we're also investing in our clients. And so I get wins with both clients, because I tell Rockwell, I'm like, we're buying inventory because we want to expose you to other people.
Yeah.
And so they're excited. And then when you give it to the client, then the client's like, oh, wow, like that's a big brand. Or one of our other clients sells like a beauty product. And so we asked him, we said, we want to include your product with some clients in our welcome
Yeah.
kits. Could you write a little thing that we could include in it that explains what value you've got from
Interesting.
working with us? And so now somebody else is evangelizing you,
Yeah.
and you're getting wins on both sides.
But see, like this right here, I feel like is what I'm like you're doing it this so intentionally with business in the business client setting, right? And I feel like because it is under the umbrella or within the constraints of a business relationship, this works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like conceptually, that person, whoever you're asking, your client or whatever, knows that if they write that for you, that's going to make your life better, but it's also going to make their life better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have no problem with the fact that it's like, oh, yeah, his life's going to get better, but he framed it in such a way or he made it in such a way that it's about me and it's going to make my life better too. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when I think through relationships, like, I think that, like, it's finding, like I'm trying to find those things
On the
in,
personal side.
yeah, in the business personal network. Like my life is business. That's what it is, right? Like it's just that's who I am. Like it's Leah and Willow now, Jesus and business. Like everyone's like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, what do you mean? I work. Like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? Right? They're like, but like for fun. And I'm like, I don't know, smoke weed. Well, not with baby anymore, but like I used to smoke weed and go to the mountains, right? Like and learn about like I literally smoke weed and go on hikes and go to church on Sunday and then get back to work. Like I don't know, right? Like that. And so for me, this is just who I am and how I operate. And I go, business and relationships are just very intertwined with me. And guess what? Brunson and I have not done official business together. We may never. We may in a decade. We may in a month. I have no idea. But I have no intention out. Like I have nothing behind. Like I have no intention to be like, okay, when can I ask Russell? Right? When can I ask Damon? But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I go, Russell and you and Brad, right? Like there are certain relationships that I'm like, I just like what these people bring to the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to make their life better. And I want them to know that I value them. And I want to continue to build those things up. And yeah, it's kind of selfish in a way, because I'm like, I want them to know that I value them. But at the same time, the reason I value them is not because I want something from them, but it's because I like who they are and I want to promote their idea of who they are and what they stand for to the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like I've been really studying, especially with my like the program that I have now with podcasts, and it's all built around this concept of relationships. What are those things that you can do that are mutually beneficial to both parties? Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise it's not worth my time and it's not worth their time. But if I can make it to where when I do it, we both benefit, and it's very clear, it's not a made up benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a, hey, I'm trying to frame this so you think that it's a benefit to you when
Yeah.
really it's a genuine thing. And like I feel like you have figured out or have a good process in place for the business side of things. And I feel like you probably have more structure than you realize on the non-business side of things. Yeah.
Probably, but yes. And there's a couple things you brought up that I want to touch on. So I am open to that idea that I probably have more structure too. The reason why I can't identify it is because I'm probably fearful of, like we talked earlier about, if I acknowledge an intentionality behind it,
Mm.
then I might taint it.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
I've never explored it. I don't know the answer, but I know where the answer is for you. The reason why it's harder in personal relationships is because it's harder to identify the constants, right? So in business, there's constants. No
Mm.
matter who my
Mm.
client is, I can always send them a thank you card. I can always send them a welcome kit, and I can always say it's their SEO 3-month birthday.
Mm.
Now, here's a good example of why constants are harder is Brad. And you know this because I've asked you, like, what about, like, I can't figure Brad out. And then what's funny is I watched the interview that you had with him a couple of weeks ago, and Brad's like, I have no feelings. and and so, like, Brad's a great example because I don't want anything specifically from Brad. And I've asked you for help, like whether it's like ideas or like even feedback. Like, dude, I remember one time I sent Ryan and Brad, I sent them cookies because they accomplished something, and I was just like, congratulations, right? And I just wanted to contribute and acknowledge that they're doing something. And like you said, like, I want
Yeah.
to establish value. I ended up running into Ryan a couple days later at an event, and he's like, dude, like, he hollered at me, and it was in this big venue. And I heard Damon, and I look around and it's him, and he's like, what's up? Come here, and waves me over, and it's like him and a couple other guys from Inner Circle and Ryan's kid. And Ryan points to his kid, he's like, this is the guy that sent the cookies. And like, Ryan was all stoked. And then I run into Brad, and it's like absolutely no acknowledgement whatsoever. And I was just like so confused. And I'm sure this is why Brad now jokes he has no feelings, but I'm like, does this guy hate me, or is this guy a dick?
Yeah.
Or like, and so Brad's probably got enough of that, that's why he jokes about it now. But now I get it. Like, Brad is Brad.
But okay, but I can tell you, and I can say this because I know Brad well enough to where I know he's okay with me saying this, right? But do you know why Brad? I mean, there is a definitely a percentage chance that he didn't even know you sent him cookies. Honestly, he doesn't deal with any of his stuff. But let's say he did. Brad said that one of the most beneficial things that I added to his life was I helped him figure or understand himself better, right? In working with
Mm-hmm.
him. If Brad can't compartmentalize and put in a
You
box
told
of
me this.
logic what something is, it just gets lost because he's like, it doesn't have a box, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's like cookies from a stranger about something that like he has no idea why that stranger knows the thing, and he goes, well, what do I do with this? And there's no box to put it in, right? Then it just leaves because his brain is so working at such a level up here that there's no box to go into it. And he's getting
Mm-hmm.
better at it for sure. But like, that's why I always joke with him, dude, I have never in my entire life, I have never met somebody that more people want to give money to that doesn't take it than Brad. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have literally been seeing his messages on his phone and people being like, I will pay you 18,000 or 25,000 right now. Tell me where to send it. And he just like ignores it because he's like, I don't know where to put it. Like, I don't know where that
Mm-hmm.
fits in because I don't have a thing for that. And he just ignores it. So it's even
Mm-hmm.
people that want to like give him tons and tons of money. He's like, I don't know where it goes. Right. And it's so fascinating with people like him. Anyway, I don't want to make this about Brad, but like, it's so fascinating when you actually get to know him. That's like the way you get in with Brad is you just figure out where you fit into a box in his brain. And then as soon as he can place you, then he'll take time to actually figure it out and figure out where it goes everywhere else. But it's like
Yeah.
you said, it's figuring out that one box. Yeah.
And so Brad is an example, and getting to know him by proxy, and he did come up at FHL, and he did go out of his way to say hi to me. Like, he came to me.
Yeah. And he's getting
And
way better at it. Yeah. But
yeah. And so I was like, so that started to click for me. And I was like, just like you're like, what the hell's Damon said to me? That was like my version with Brad. I'm
yeah.
like, oh, okay, that's how Brad is.
Yep.
But that's a good example of there's, if we're comparing business relationships and there's constants there, regardless of who the person is or
Yeah.
the dynamic, there's not as many constants in a personal relationship because you have less. Like, in a business relationship, it's like there's an objective. You have a shared objective. In a
Right.
personal relationship, you have no specific objective, more or less, right? So it's like it's harder to define constants that you can repeat on a pattern like you can
Okay,
with a business relationship.
so think about that. Let's play on that for a second because I think you're onto something there. So look at like Hermosi, right? Or I know you're not friends
Mm-hmm.
with them, but like Hermosi, right? And do you know who Alex Becker is?
Mm-hmm.
So he's like another one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I mean, I'm sure Elon's the same way at the highest level. It's like it's basically their entire life, every aspect of it is like completely engineered towards one goal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you listen to them and they will say, if you're not like, if you're in my life, it's to help me get to this goal. And if you're not helping me get to the goal, then I have no need for you in my life. And I don't think they mean ill by that. Like, I don't think they're trying to be
Mm-hmm.
an asshole, right? But like, they're just so completely and utterly locked in with like, this is where I'm going. So with that type of a person, how do you, I guess the question I'm actually getting at is how do you determine what type of people you want to have a relationship with? Because like I I feel like I feel like I could build a relationship with just about anyone with enough intentional effort. Because it's like
I'd agree.
if you just become the person that is valuable to their life, it's almost impossible for someone to say no because someone will always do what's in best interest for them. You might have to actually like not be intent or not be, you might have an ulterior motive, right? But I could go build a relationship with those people. But at the same time, when you actually start to sit down and look at it, you go, yeah, but does that even make sense for me? Like,
But
cause like we're
yeah,
complete, you know what I mean?
well,
So how do you determine that?
Hermosi is a great example because for a couple of reasons. Is one, you nailed it, is because he has such a clear mission that he's after, and then he's literally said, you're either contributing or you're not.
Right.
And a great example is something he also said in one of his clips was, people message me all the time and say, I want to be involved in your life. How can I give you value? And Hormozy said, you just took from me. You
Yeah.
just wasted my time. And so you have to be proactive. So there's a component of proactiveness to this too.
Yeah.
So continuing to use Alex as an example,
I'm
obviously
listening. I gotta keep going.
obviously Alex would be somebody that would be interesting to have a relationship with. And there's certain things that you could leverage. But where we're going, okay, how do I just want to be in his ecosystem with nothing, wanting nothing from him? You bring up a great point. Like, I don't know that I would pursue that relationship because I already know that it has such a definitive direction
Right.
that conceptually it's just bragging rights. And that's not what
Right.
I'm after because I can't contribute value to him. He is so focused that it wouldn't provide the personability of a relationship that I'm pursuing. So generally when I'm pursuing relationships, it's like relatability and some sort
Right.
of companionship. And that wouldn't exist with somebody like Alex. And that's not a bad
Right.
thing.
Right. We're not bashing him in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
And so you bring up a great point. Like, not all relationships you pursue, and you got to be honest with yourself. I think it's a little bit different for you and I because we can genuinely say it is possible to pursue relationships without an intent,
100%.
without an ulterior motive. But I don't think other people are as honest with themselves.
Yeah.
I think other people, if they said, "Oh, I could be friends with Hermosi and not want anything," like bullshit, right? Like the majority of the people that are going to pursue
Right.
something like that, they want the spotlight by proxy, right?
100%. Yep.
And so we can use another example.
Well, it's just one thought on that, and then keep the example. Like people ask me with Russell a lot, right? They're like, "Could you introduce me to Russell?" Or like, "What do I do for Russell this or whatever?" Right? Or one of my favorite things people say is, "If I were friends with Russell, I am like, and that's why you're not."
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like it's ulterior
Well,
motive,
well,
right?
he was who I was going to give the example of. And
Okay.
so
Yeah. Perfect.
with so there's like an evolution of the relationship that culminated to we'll say the current status of him and I engaging on SEO. And so when that started was joining Inner Circle. So I get in, and we can still come back to the story of how. So I get in with Inner Circle. So now I have direct access to Russell, right?
Right.
And so while tons of other people are, many people join Inner Circle for different reasons. And if you're not familiar with Inner Circle, it's Russell's mastermind. And so some people join for the curriculum, right? Because you're among other successful people, and so you get to learn things. And so likewise, some people join for networking. Some people join purely for the access to Russell and hoping
And
to
some
get
people
some.
join just because they want to hang out with their friend on the other side of an invisible line and pay $50,000 for a bracelet.
That's me. I
That's
just
Damon.
wanted to hang out with Josh.
That's all.
So so now that you have, so now you're in your circle, now you have access to Russell, and so many people, like I didn't take a picture with Russell until like 2.5 years into knowing him or being in inner
Crazy.
circle, because that's what everybody else was doing. And that's not a bad thing. But for me, it's like you're either giving or you're taking. And I know that Russell has no problem taking pictures, but conceptually, I had a hard time with going up and taking 15 seconds of his time. Those are his 15 seconds.
Yep.
So I largely ran the other way. The first time I sat down and had any words with Russell at all was like a month after joining, and we have the get together up in Boise, and you're in a private facility, and it was a lunch break. So lunch break, I went back to the hotel and took a nap, and I came back and he's sitting at my table. And it was just like me and Russell and one other person. And I'm just like, hey.
Right.
And like, and if you truly know Russell, he has a stage presence that he often talks about being an introvert. It was
He's
visibly
so
notice.
awkward, dude.
It was visibly noticeable how uncomfortable he was with what to say next. And so it was basically me, hey, and then him like, hey, in return.
Yep.
Like that
Yeah.
was the
It's
first
so
conversation.
funny.
And so what happened between then and now engaging with him, and I wouldn't by any means, like I couldn't call him up by any means. You have a relationship significantly further than I do, as far as directly personal, but I can engage him now, right?
Right.
And so what happened in between there was I didn't have any intentionality. Like, sure, it crossed my mind, like if at some point we were able to work together, obviously that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go manipulate the relationship to try to pursue it directly. And then
Yeah.
where you really have to ask yourself and be honest with yourself is like, okay, so what started to plant the seeds for the engagement was Russell would vox me questions every once in a while. And so that's an opportunity where many people would, like, he would ask me an SEO question. I would answer it, and that's the end.
And that's
It
it. Yep.
wasn't like, do you want me to send you a proposal?
Right.
Do you want me, like, it was just like he asked one thing, I'm going to answer one thing, and I'm not going to talk about anything else.
Yep.
And that happened every few months, which then became every few weeks, which then became a couple days within a short week or two period, which then became him going, you know what, screw this. I'm a good starter, horrible finisher. Meet so and so. Where do we go from here?
Yep.
And so throughout the entire engagement, there was multiple opportunities where I could have been selfish to try and be intentional, and it would have never worked out.
Yeah. But now he asked you and you didn't chase him, he chased you. And that's the whole dynamic switch, right? Because it's easy to get someone who has lower status, and like just objectively speaking, I'm not saying we assign status, I just mean in general, like to the population, right? Like Russell understands that he has a level of status that you and I don't, right? He's not blind to that. It's easy to get someone that is lower than you in status to like come want to buy from you. It's very difficult, or it's a much different game to have someone with higher perceived status come and chase you down, because like now, once again, it's not about having leverage one over the other, but it is a fundamentally different relationship, because now you know that they want what it is that you bring to the table, and that you like, you know, where you're providing value to their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to turn the conversation, because it's been really, really good about relationships, but I want to turn the conversation a little bit more personal. Because, you know, you and I obviously have a relationship, and we talk about, you know, shared values and things. And what's fascinating is one of the things, and you know this, like one of the things that I respect about you most is how much you love your wife and how you take care and treat your kids, right? Like it's one of, I mean, right. It's, you know, how generous you are and those things. It's like, what I feel like it's a large part of what defines who you are, at a core level. And so as someone who, I very, very much value the like idea of marriage and staying faithful to, you know, to your spouse. I think that's a morally good thing for society. And then as someone who had a very present, even though my dad worked a lot and was away a lot just due to, you know, needing to provide, I had a very present and active father in my life. And that played a insane role in who I've become today, right? And you see so many people, entrepreneurs especially, people with success that will sacrifice the relationship with their kids, the relationship with their spouse for work. And it's crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I have very, very common shared values there. What's interesting though is that you and I differ probably the largest when it comes to religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I am not religious. Don't worry, it's not going to be a religious conversation. But like,
mm-hmm.
I assess, or maybe not assess, I garnish a lot of my morals and values and things of that nature from religion, right? Specifically, or I say from a relationship with Jesus, right? I hate traditional religion pretty heavily. I think it's a bunch of hypocrites, but I understand the purpose of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, how do you, like, what made you in that sense? Because like
Mm-hmm.
you don't have, like, you clearly don't garnish it of like Jesus said so, right? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like where I'm like, okay, this is a morally good thing, and then I experience, and then I continued. You just do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, what drives you, and where do you assess that? Because like, dude, I know you're not a billionaire, but like you've got money, you've got connections, you've got, like, you could do whatever you wanted, right? And yet you choose very intentionally to be the husband that you are to your wife and to be the father that you are to your kids. And it's very obvious. Where does that come from?
So I could probably answer this pretty accurately as I think out loud, right?
Perfect.
Like um, it largely started from my childhood. So my parents divorced when they were two, when I was two. I'm the oldest of seven.
Oh, really? I didn't
And
know you had six younger siblings.
yeah, so
That's crazy. I have six younger siblings. That's crazy.
I have a brother that's 2 years younger than I am, and then it skips 12 years, and the other five are half brothers and sisters. Conceptually, I didn't even realize that was a thing. Like, and I remember I was at my dad's house who remarried, and I was talking to my stepbrother. I would guess I was 13, and so this stepbrother was probably around 16, 17 at the time. And I said something about my siblings, and he says, "Oh, so they're half brothers and sisters." And I was like, "No." And he's like, "But they have a different dad." And I'm like, "Yeah, so they're half brothers and sisters." I was like, "Oh, I guess you're right." So
Yeah.
conceptually, I mean, that's just kind of like a side note. Conceptually, I never thought about it. So I came from, my parents were divorced. My childhood was largely, uh, we would move a ton. So after my mom and dad divorced, then there was a window of time before she remarried. So she's been married 3 times. There was like a 6 year window. So I think between the ages of 2 and 8, she wasn't married, and that was living wherever we could live, living in friends' basements. And so like that was totally like, you don't know what you don't know until
Right.
you're older. Like that's just like that was just normal to me.
Right.
And so I never had consistency in a home. And so then she remarried, nice guy. They ended up getting divorced later. And then she married a third time who ended up being a gentleman that contributed largely in a negative way in my life, which I turned into a positive. And so that taking a couple of those, now we can go down a few paths. So one is I came from lower middle class, and so the one part I can't put my finger on as to why I am the way I am was the proactiveness, right? And so the willingness to go, I don't want that in my life. So how do I be intentional about avoiding it?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, at a young age, I said, okay, if I want to learn from this and not repeat this, um, what are the common denominators? Okay, financial stability. Because financial stability is one thing that is missing, that is causing us to move a lot, that's causing, my mom to be take support from men just to provide for her kids. And so I started to pay attention to things like that. And so then in comes my mom's third husband, alcoholic. Recently, he actually just passed away this year from the impact of his lifestyle choices. And growing up with that, then you bring in the component of instability, violence. And so that was like, okay, I don't want that in my life. And so I was able to catalog things very clearly of things I didn't want, which made me then go, what is the opposite of that then that I need to achieve to prevent that? And what's interesting is this could actually open up a whole dynamic to other conversations about like mental health. And so I'll come to that here in a minute. So I was very intentional about like, okay, what do I, by default, if I eliminate these certain things from my life, then it acquires these other things, the safety nets, right? And
Mm.
so there was that. And then I'll kind of vomit a couple things and then we can come back and pick up wherever. So then,
One second, and I want to make sure that with the word choice, I noticed that you didn't say to do the opposite of those things. I noticed that you said to eliminate those things, right? Is that is that accurate? Because it's not
yes,
just doing the opposite; it was also just eliminating those,
I wouldn't,
or both.
I think there's probably a lot of weight to you bringing that up that I wouldn't have recognized.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, keep going. We can come back if we have time.
So
Cool. Yeah.
that was probably more subconscious, but I think
Yep.
you bring up a good point.
Okay.
So then it's like, so then fast forward a little bit. My wife and I are married. We waited 5 years before we had kids. And so when she was pregnant with her first kid, I had just started my business, which is a whole other story, where I got to that point. And what happened was I remember sitting in our old house and I remember sitting in the living room and thinking like, okay, there's a kid on the way. And now let's reevaluate all the things largely that we just talked about, foundational things that you want to bring to a family dynamic. And one of those being financial stability. So it's like, now is the time that you put in the extra hours because I have this window
Yeah.
of however many months before she's due that literally become, well, I guess not literally, to your point, a choice of, do I take away time from my family later to accomplish things? Or for me, it was like, well, put in the time now so I have more freedom later. And so I was very intentional about how I structured things even before my kids were born. And then now that I have 3 kids, I'm very intentional about my calendar. And so I default them first in my availability. An example is between 7:30 and 9 a.m. It's always blocked off Monday through Friday, no matter what you can't get on my calendar. And then I do the same thing like 3 to 4 p.m. So when they're coming home, whether I pick them up or my wife picks them up, like I can come up and say hi and give them a hug. Even if I have a call like at 9 and my kid's running late and they're still here, and even though technically the person was able to get on my calendar, respectfully, I will pause it and I'm like, my kid's leaving, give me 5 minutes, I'm going to say goodbye.
Yeah.
So none of those things are weird unless you make it weird. So when you're
Right.
proactive about it, and to your point of, it's become a core part of my values and in my visual, in the perception of my image, people know me as a family person. So therefore, it allows me the freedom to reinforce that family priority. Um, that's a lot. There's a lot of paths
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah. And it's okay because there's so much that was covered here. Where do you think though where do you think that you garnished or formed this value that family was important versus money or success or fame or freedom to do whatever the frick you wanted, right? Because it's like, once again, and I'm asking this from the perspective of, you're fascinating to me for a variety of reasons, right? But one of the biggest one being, you're not coming at family is a good thing because of a religious grounding,
Mhm.
right? You have come to that conclusion outside of any form of religion telling you that is so, right? So why is that important to you? Like, how did that, is it just innate? Like, did you look at the world and go, no, family is a good thing? Was it instilled somewhere? Was it someone that you looked up to that like told you that? Did you read a book somewhere? Or
No,
do you know?
it, I don't know definitively, but in general, it's through observation of the things that impacted me as a kid. And now that I'm in my 40s, you forget some of those things,
Right.
especially as you build your own family and you rewire those emotions. Um, so oh, I could only assume that a big chunk of it was self-protection in some ways, where it's like, okay, like, okay, little Damon went through that, and so how do you protect other people from that?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's part of that, but I would also challenge you. There was a really interesting thing, and this is interesting because, like, as you prefaced it, like, this is not going to be religious talk, and for the
Right.
audience, the reason why that's funny or applicable is because Josh and I are he's largely religious. I don't know that I'd say I'm an atheist, probably an agnostic. And that's not to say that I disagree with religion. It's just not my thing.
I
And
get
so
it. Yeah.
him and I have talked about that behind closed doors. And so that's why this is such a dynamic conversation. What's interesting is, like, I feel safe in talking about this because I know that where our differences are, and this
Yeah.
isn't like a manipulative discussion.
Right.
But there was I I would also question on the other side is, like, why do morals have to come from a religious grounding? Why couldn't it be uh I think you used a good word, innate.
Yeah.
Why do we have to justify morals?
Yeah. And so the context of that question, well, I don't think morals come from religion. I think that moral or religion communicates morals, right?
Mhm.
But like I think morals come from God, right? I think that there's an intelligent creator that instilled morals into that. So that's a whole different discussion. But the
Mhm.
reason I asked the question specifically is I grew up in a large family, 8 kids, 6 younger, 1 older, right? Around in a very religious setting and was homeschooled. And most of the people around that I grew up around in a very, very small world were very religious, almost legalistically religious, right? And there was a lot of pain and a lot of brokenness and a lot of
Mhm.
frustration, right, for me. And it wasn't brokenness in, I wasn't around a bunch of people that were, divorced and abusing each other, but I also saw the complications that came with large families and lack of resources to tend to those families and the drama and the chaos and the lack, right? And I ran the other way. I was like,
Mhm.
I don't need family. I literally packed all my
Mhm.
stuff and moved across country to the middle of nowhere. I left. I didn't go to relatives. I didn't stay with current family. And I was like, I'm going to figure this shit out on my own. I don't need anybody
Mhm.
else. Right. And what brought me back to family was actually not me looking at family and being like, family's great. What brought me back to family and the values of family was because when I recommitted my life to God and I actually started studying that, I saw the value of family as a whole in society and as me as a man. Like I felt like I had a role to play, and that me as a man, if I wanted to have connection with my spouse, and when I studied marriage, I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Oh, fatherhood. Oh, and then once I started executing it, then I actually experienced the value of it and it became important to me. But
Mhm.
like my experience, it was very different, right? And so I came back to this value of family and of this because of morality and because of morals that I learned from, let's call it the Bible, right? Religious text.
Mhm.
Whereas you came to that not through that, right? You came to it to a very different conclusion. And I'm not trying to say that like your way or my way is right. I'm
Sure.
simply trying to understand how you came to that conclusion because I think a lot of people that don't have religion, right? Or not religion, that's not that don't have some grounding some in some
Mhm.
like they don't come to that conclusion. It has to be instilled somewhere, but I could be wrong. And so I'm just curious how you came to that or how that was taught to you or communicated to you, or if it was just something that you always knew.
It certainly wasn't taught. It certainly wasn't from witnessing it. It certainly wasn't from any sort of mentor. I could probably simplify it really easy if I had to pick something. The closest thing I could come up with is just the obviousness of connection
Yeah.
in being a human,
Yeah.
right? Like, with my kids, it's pretty obvious whether you want to be a father or not that you are going to have an influence on their life, and that influence can either be positive or negative. Like, there is no neutral.
Yeah.
And so I probably look at that with everybody, and that's actually something I've said quite literally to my oldest son. Is he had there was a one of his friends stood up for. There was a kid that was picking on him, and so he tried to start it. Interjected himself in between to try and bring peace. The bully, the instigator, was defensive back, and so then it escalated, right? And so I was able to use that example with my son and say, I admire you for having good intentions going into it, but can you identify where it fell apart? Which he clearly could. And I said, can you see why it fell apart? And it's because he started to play the game back. And that was an example for me to go, okay, so in all people, in any circumstance, whether it's a friendship, a spouse, a child, a business, like you are either contributing positively or you are contributing negatively.
Mm.
And so I probably at some subconscious level at some point in my life just acknowledge that, because I have little distinction between my wife and my kids versus other people as far as like intentionality. Like I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go out of my way to like this. Hopefully this is communicated properly. But it's like my wife and my kids, of course they get special treatment to an extent, but largely not. And what I mean by that is I think everybody should be acknowledged in a positive way. And so I'm not going out of my way like you versus my wife. Like if I can do something good for you versus do something good for my wife, if I have the opportunity, I'm going to do something good for both of you.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think I look at people in general as it's either a positive contribution or a negative contribution.
Yeah,
And because it's never going to be negative, therefore it's always positive.
that makes sense. So for you then, you've achieved a level of success that if most people, probably particularly in America, would achieve, like they would be happy if they achieved that in their lifetime, right? Financially, you have a good marriage, kids, good, all these things, right? And this is something that, it's interesting. I feel like struggle plays a huge role in so many people's lives because if they don't struggle, they like lose sense of purpose, right? Because it's like
Mm-hmm.
the struggle is their purpose to get out of struggle, right? And then it's like not that you don't struggle, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't have financial worries and you don't have, a lot of the things, which is commendable. So moving forward in life, what drives you or what is your sense of personal purpose and mission? Like what are you building now? Like what why keep building the business? Why is it experience life with your kids? Like what is that sense of purpose, personal mission and yeah, driving factor now to continue doing it? Because you clearly don't have to.
It's an interesting question at an interesting point in my life. So a couple of years ago, I was talking about defining things in relationships and like how you can maximize it. That same concept. I had never defined like a finish line in entrepreneurship.
Right.
And so one day somebody asked me, they said, what's the number? And I've thought about, is there a number? And it's always been no. And so I'm not going to go figure it out. And then for whatever reason, when I was asked this time, I said, I don't know, but I don't want to figure it out. And the reason why I don't want to figure it out is because I don't want to be lazy. Because if I already have that number, is it going to
Mm,
change my drive? And so then I deferred it for a while. And then I kept thinking about that dialogue in my head. And so then I came back and I said, you know what? I am going to define it, not for a finish line, but as a baseline. And so what I did was, what would I need to maintain my lifestyle? So what sort of revenue would I need to hit a certain multiple minus taxes, all in, cashed out, never do anything again to maintain where I'm currently at? And I figured out a number and I hit it 9 months later. And that number was double where I had to have been at 9 months prior. And so when I recognized that, it was interesting because I'm glad I acknowledged before I defined that number that it wasn't going to be the finish line.
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And so nothing changed at all, literally nothing. It was like a blip on the radar in my thought, and I moved on. But it's interesting to be able to acknowledge that like I could walk away. Now, walking away from a baseline is largely different than walking away from what I think is possible. What I think
Yeah.
is possible is, you know, 50x where I'm at. But the more that I think about this, and I think the majority of us get into entrepreneurship for financial incentive. If you're one step ahead, you also acknowledge for freedom of time. But when you start pursuing it and then you hit those baselines, like when you have your financial needs met at a core, not disposable income,
Right.
but when you no longer have to worry about food on the table, mortgages, whatever it is you decide is safe, then it gives you breathing room. So then you start looking at the financial pursuits as dreams, like
Right.
would be nices. And then I've never had a strong desire for materialistic things. Everything that I purchased that's been of a larger ticket has been either for family or legacy. So we have a nice house. We bought a 6-bedroom, 4-bath house when I had one 11-month-old kid.
Mhm.
But it was intentional because I never wanted to move again, and I wanted a place big enough that we could grow into. And now we've grown into it. I bought lake properties and cabins for my kids, and those could be passed down for generations. And I've gone so far as to put them in trusts so that they cannot come out of that family legacy.
Mm.
Because I don't like, I've taken this proactive step to say, I don't want my kids to fight over this.
Yep. Yep.
And so everything bigger ticket, with one exception, this year I bought a car. And I bought a car largely just to check it off my head, not because I
Yeah.
really want the car or care about the car. It was more rewarding for me to go, okay, cool. I did it. Okay,
Yep.
move on. Right. So your pursuits and your whys change. And then generally it evolves into legacy or impact. So for me, I'm pretty confident in the legacy I've provided for my family. And so now it's like, okay, well, I still have a long runway in front of me. So how can I now expand that perspective into impact and legacy beyond my family? And so like we just did a big charity event last weekend where we did Christmas gifts for 50 kids that were underprivileged in our area. And so
Oh,
now it's like,
cool.
how do we make impacts on things like that? Like I've paid off the entire county's school lunch debt for kids that had past due lunch balances. And so it's like, how can I visibly see an impact in the community? And so I don't know the full answer yet. And this also ties into something you said earlier. I can't remember what it was, but it was something that you said. I know at one point you said like you ran from family. It
Yeah.
wasn't that, but it was something close to that. Because what happens when you age, and I wanted to talk to you directly about it, and that's why I'm frustrated. I can't remember what it was, because it was applicable to this concept of your whys and your backgrounds and morals and what drives you and what your grounding source is. Because as you get older, for me, what happened with the combination of all those things, where it's like, okay, grew up, you know, broken home, alcoholic stepdad, no financial stability, and all those things, and it's like, okay, I made it. I broke all the chains and shifted my future generations to come for multiple generations. And then you get to a point where you're like, who I remember what it was. You said, what's fun, right? Outside of business and family.
Oh, yeah.
And people are like, what do you do? And you don't know. I'm in the same position right now, but now I'm addressing it. So I'd be interested for you to pay attention to this conversation and and bookmark it for 10 and 20 years from now. Because where I'm at now is I've been in the same position that you were. Like I genuinely enjoy entrepreneurship. I can honestly say I don't know either. So I know exactly what you're saying when you're like, what do you do outside of family and work? Like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
travel a lot, but that's because it's family.
Right. And that's my thing, right? If it's like if I do something outside of my work, with the exception of church, right? Because I'm like, I really do like I love studying Jesus specifically. Funny enough, I'm reading a book that so Dan Henry. Dan Henry's Muslim
Mm-hmm,
now, and his
mm-hmm,
wife is like super duper, right? And like
mm-hmm,
covers and like the eye slits and like the
mm-hmm,
whole nine yards. And so they also have Jesus in their religion, but it's obviously not the same. I mean, it's the same person, but like they don't believe he's the son of God and all that. So I'm
mm-hmm,
reading a book about Jesus from the Muslim perspective.
mm-hmm.
So like for me though, outside of this, it's Leah. And so like we
Yeah.
travel, we do things, it's fun because that's what she enjoys and family and things of that nature. But like the reason I started the podcast is because the podcast combined essentially for me the two things that I loved doing the most, which was one, entrepreneurship, providing financial means, right? And second, studying big, important life philosophical and religious questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what would you do for the rest of your life? I'm like, interview people, ask questions, have conversations. That's it. I don't have anything outside of that.
Yeah. So if somebody asked you and I, and they said, okay, Josh, take all the things you do in a day,
Mhm.
and I'm going to have you remove something one at a time. Okay. So remove entrepreneurship, remove your wife, remove your kid, remove the podcast, remove religion. We're looking at just Josh as an individual. Who is Josh outside of those things? And what could Josh do outside of those things? And so when I'm at like, when people say, what would you do for fun outside of that, I don't have an answer. And
Yeah,
I
because I'm
assume you
like,
don't
who is
either.
Josh? Josh is a child of God, saved by him. I'm powerful, I'm influential, I'm wealthy, I'm free. Like that's who I am. So like in that capacity with those four things, that's who I am. I then use those things inside the context of business and studying and
Right.
yeah, that's
Yeah. So now in 10 or 20 years, a shift happens, or at least for me, and I assume the majority of people that have the financial stability and the freedom of time to pause and look at it from this way. Who is Damon outside of an entrepreneur, father, and a husband? I have no idea. And so this is the journey that I'm going through, and this is what I'm curious as in your 10 and 20 years from now is like I think you're correct. That is who you are, and you might not fully understand the analogy I'm trying to make of who is Josh outside of those things.
yeah.
But at some point, I'm willing to bet you it'll make sense because I've always been like, no, I'm a family man and a husband and an entrepreneur. There's a different version of Josh that is just completely isolated, broken down Josh. And it's a weird place to be in because I don't know the answer. And so this ties into where I made a brief comment about like, you talk about all these things and bring them together to mental health. And it's like, so I got to a point like a year ago where it's like all these things that have given me superpowers, right? Okay, don't bring in financial instability to my family. Don't bring in violence and negativity. Like create roots, create a safety net and a bubble for your family so they're protected.
Right.
I've done it, right? And so what happened was like a year ago, um, my mom just started taking up space in my head because I largely blame my mom more than my stepdad for his violence because she
Mm,
allowed it. She brought it in and she let
yeah.
it sustain. And so even though I took all those things that I experienced and I said, okay, that can either make or break me, and I chose for it to make me, then for a long time I thought I was like at peace. Like I did the right thing and I
Yeah.
broke all those chains, which are true. But then what happened is I just started to have like this mental exhaustion. And it's like I would wake up pissed off at my mom. I'd wake up frustrated. And it wasn't a specific event or a day or anything. It was just like this general cloud of frustration. And so being the proactive person that I am, it's like, well, if I see a problem, and you're largely the same way, you see a problem, you're like, well, I, I see this, I identify the solution on the other side of it, and then I just break through it, right?
Right.
So anything that's ever been in my way, I just figure out the solution and I get it out of my way.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out how to get my mom out of my head. And so, like after a year of this, I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna go figure out somebody that can help me. And so I searched like, high performance therapist and things like that to
Yeah.
try and find like a large thread that we've talked about in this conversation is like people understanding your we'll call it your first world problems, right? The must be nices and things like that.
Yeah.
Because even though those are fortunate positions to be in, doesn't devalue how much emotional weight comes with them.
100%.
So I finally found somebody that I was really fortunate. First person I went to talk about like these types of really deep personal things, I felt like understood and I could have a conversation with, and not only at a be vulnerable with comfortably, but also at a level of intelligence where I felt like whether they truly understood me or not, they made me feel like they understood me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so one visit and she got my mom out of my head.
Wow.
And now I still go to this lady because it's interesting to go, what else can I solve? Like, what other things are there? So I largely still go for two reasons. The majority of times I go in now, I don't know what the topic's going to be because I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
really have any other problems. It was just my
Yeah.
mom that was bothering me. But I still go in for two reasons. One is because it gives me a place to shut the hell up. And so I can go in, like when you're in positions of running your business or in positions of authority, you don't get challenged a lot. And so you're the one that maintains the momentum. And so you have to be very intentional to step outside of your comfort zone to go, am I still heading in the right direction or is my perspective still accurate?
Mm.
And so it's been really interesting to go into a neutral environment that's non-objective and then just get everything out and then be told unobjectively, like, here's a different way you could look at this. and so it's been fascinating. So
Yeah.
so think about think about it in the years to come.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to, because like my answer to that would be outside of everything, like at the very, very core of everything is I'm a servant of Christ. And I don't know if that's the actual answer that answers the actual question you're even asking. That's just what comes to my head there. Cause like
Mhm.
everything, like there is nothing else outside in my head for me. There is nothing that is of any meaning or any significance of anything of or anything without Christ. So like there's that. It'll be interesting, my opinion on this in 10 years, though. And we'll have to come back in 10 years. I mean, we'll do several
Yeah,
podcasts before then, I'm sure. But to like do that, you've
it's
never done
interesting
psychedelics, have you?
to no,
Yeah, yeah.
but I did. I've gone to a ketamine clinic. Yeah,
Okay. So
but
close, but yeah.
the yeah, so it's interesting to try and find who you are without associating yourself with anything else,
But
right?
I don't think that's like I don't because I believe in because I believe in Christ, because I know Christ to be real. Like that would be like being like you should think about the world without thinking about how it was created. And you're like, well, how can you assess the world if you don't assess how it was created? Right. And so it's like, for me, it's like, I can't think of myself not in proportion to anything else. Like I've done, I'm pretty open about my psychedelic journey. Right. And like, I try, like, I'll go and, I'll do LSD or like whatever. And I'm like down. And like I try to get to nothingness, and it's just like no. There's always a thing. There's always something else, and that is God, right? There's this other thing, and so to me, like I don't believe there is anything outside of Christ, and I don't think you can factor. For me, I don't think I can factor myself outside of Christ because that would be like, well, but He's there, and I'm
Yeah.
created in His image. That's what it says. That's what He said. So yeah, I don't think it's
I
possible.
don't think there, I don't know the answer,
Yeah,
and
of course not.
I
Yeah,
don't know my answer. I certainly don't
yeah.
know your answer. I think the concept of is it possible to break you down to your simplest form is something that as you get older, I think your perspective will
I know it will for sure,
yeah,
and it'll be interesting. Well,
yeah,
Damon, thank you. I appreciate it. We've been on for 90 minutes almost. It's crazy. Maybe even a little longer than that. I
yeah.
appreciate your time coming on. I do have a couple rapid fire questions to wrap up here, if that's cool
Let's
with
do it.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. I've thought of some new ones here, and one of them came up here. What makes you mad? Like
Mm.
genuinely, like angry, like not just like I'm annoyed or oh that made
Do
me
these have to be
like
rapid fire answers?
yeah. Like what makes you mad?
I'll give two answers.
Okay.
And I'll try and keep these short. Um, a literal answer is uh, lack of re- acknowledging responsibility. Like I'll tie that into like victim mentality mindset, right? Like a
Okay.
lack of acknowledging the your participation in your circumstances, right?
Okay. Okay.
Um, let me give a half answer on top of that.
Okay.
Um, when we're talking about like therapists and things like that, I am not a person that gets mad. Eh,
I am aware.
And my therapist asked me an interesting question. She said, "Do you have shame in that?" And I said, "No, not at all." If the and I made up a theoretical example of somebody a violent circumstance like an aggressor coming at my family, I would get mad, right?
Right.
Um, but in general, I think that through the evolution of the discussions we've had about childhood and things like that, which we're exposed to, um, it's been interesting to acknowledge like is that or to question is that something that I intentionally suppress?
Hmm.
Uh,
Interesting.
next
All
next
right.
question.
Yeah. What's one bucket list item that you haven't been able to, or that you have not yet accomplished in life?
I think I'm gonna try and do it next year. I want to check my kids out of school and travel for a while. I have no problem with it. Getting them on board is a different challenge.
Really, getting your kids on board is difficult.
Yeah. They get used to it, like even though it's like, and it's fascinating too because now is significantly different than when you were a kid versus even the generation before. It's like now, like half the time your kids hang out, like they're still communicating, they're still on their phones, they're still on computers. I'm
Yeah.
like, you'll still talk to your friends and play Fortnite every night. Like, what are you talking about?
Oh man. All right. So traveling with them. What's one thing that you knew for absolutely true, like that you were completely certain of when you were younger, let's say in your 20s, that you no longer believe to be true or know to be different?
Mm. Uh, I think a part, it's kind of similar to the first question, is I've come to acknowledge that some people will never accept their own influence on their own life. Like before, it used to be like, okay, I guess a better way to say this is like, I thought you could change people's minds. I thought you could teach them, and I thought you could show them things. And there are more people than I expected to be, whether blissfully or intentionally ignorant to the circumstances in their life.
Yeah.
And it's been really hard for me to not help people.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, it's gotta be rough. All right, last question. You're at the end of your life, fast forward, and every person that you've been called to impact. So not every person on earth, right? But every person that you've been called to serve, to impact, to touch their life, you get to leave them. They're gonna forget basically everything that you've ever taught them or told them or anything, right? But you get to leave them
Mm.
with one core message, one core idea that they will 100% believe to be true. You don't need justification for it. You don't need to explain why. It's just a factual answer of or a factual statement of this is this.
Mhm.
What is that message or piece of
Mm.
wisdom that you would?
I,
What's the message to them?
I got the idea. I'm probably going to slaughter it verbally, but something along the lines of, in the end, so little of this matters. Like all the day-to-day crap, all the drama, all the even the financial pursuits, like once your base needs are met, like it's the end of your life and it's all gone anyway. So do the things you enjoy. All the, all the cliche answers, like it's all about relationships. In the end, so little of this really
Matters.
matters.
All right. Well, Damon, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on. We will link all of your socials and stuff down below. Do you have anything that you're promoting right now or you want people to go check out?
Uh, you can just hit damonburton.com. It's got all the socials, and then on it's got my free SEO book if you want to dive into marketing.
Sweet. Damon, thank you so much. Talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
Josh.
Guys, that's it. We'll see you next time. Peace.